Do you miss your grandmother? I do, I truly do. I miss my grandfather as well. But there is something about Windsor that makes the absence feel sharper there, more intimate, almost physical. The air seems heavier with memory. The stone corridors echo differently. The light through the tall windows feels familiar in a way that is difficult to explain. For me, Windsor does not simply remind me of her, Windsor is her. Every corner holds a fragment of her presence. Every quiet garden path carries the rhythm of her steps. I used to visit her there, sometimes with no grand occasion, no formal engagement, just a quiet afternoon. I would sit beside her and share tea, and in those moments the world outside the gates felt distant and irrelevant. She made the best tea I have ever tasted, not because it was rare or elaborate, but because of the way she prepared it. Deliberate, calm, present. There was something deeply grounding about watching her pour, the steam rising gently between us, the soft clink of porcelain. The unhurried conversation that followed. She listened in a way that made you feel seen without being examined, understood without being judged. And every time I left, I felt nourished in a way that had nothing to do with food. Yes, she always made sure I was well fed, that was her way, but what lingered was something else entirely. A steadiness, a reassurance, a sense that no matter how complex or demanding the world became, there was a place where things remained simple and sincere. That kind of love is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It simply holds you in place long enough to remember who you are. Then came February 3rd, 2026. Buckingham Palace released a brief, meticulously worded two-paragraph statement. It was restrained, almost austere, delivered in the tone of institutional continuity the monarchy has perfected over centuries. To the casual observer, it seemed procedural, another administrative announcement wrapped in dignified language, but beneath that calm surface lay something monumental. The statement confirmed that Prince William had been named the sole beneficiary of one of the most secretive and historically significant private estates in the monarchy's history. It was not Sandringham, not Balmoral, not Windsor. It was something older than all of them in spirit, if not in stone, something intentionally concealed, something Queen Elizabeth II had protected in silence for decades. The words themselves were simple, but they detonated quietly across royal households, legal chambers, and private advisory circles throughout Britain. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Phones began to ring. Senior courtiers reread the statement more than once, not because they misunderstood it, but because they understood it all too well. When Camilla and her son, Tom Parker Bowles, learned what had been transferred, and more importantly, what had been deliberately withheld, the atmosphere inside palace walls shifted instantly. This was not the disappointment of being overlooked. It was not even anger in its ordinary form. It was something colder, a realization that decisions had been made years earlier, beyond negotiation, beyond influence. Doors they believed could be opened were not simply locked, they had never existed. Senior aides who had served through decades of internal tensions described the reaction as unlike anything they had witnessed in a generation. Not explosive, not theatrical, but tight, controlled, and unmistakably furious. What had unfolded was not merely a redistribution of property. It was the unveiling of a long-prepared strategy, a design set in motion well before anyone thought to challenge it. To truly understand the weight of that moment, we must go back to 1944. Britain was deep in the shadow of the Second World War. The monarchy itself stood as both symbol and anchor for a nation under siege. King George VI carried not only ceremonial responsibility, but emotional gravity. It was during this period of uncertainty that he quietly acquired an estate tucked deep within the Chiltern Hills, straddling Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire. It would come to be known as the Cedar Estate. From the beginning, it was never meant to be visible. There were no newspaper announcements, no public registry celebration, no official photographs. Its acquisition was handled discreetly, almost invisibly, as though the land itself were being folded into silence. It was not intended as a display of wealth or expansion. It was intended as sanctuary, strategic, private, insulated from the turbulence of politics and public scrutiny. For more than 80 years, the Cedar Estate existed in quiet obscurity. Only a small circle of senior courtiers and trusted legal advisors knew its full significance. They guarded that knowledge with discipline. It was discussed in low voices, recorded in private ledgers, protected not through spectacle but through absence. Decades later, when internal briefing notes were finally shared with a select group of royal correspondents, even the most seasoned historians found themselves momentarily stunned. The Cedar Estate was not simply land. Within its boundaries stood a private chapel, modest from the outside yet sacred in purpose. Inside, an engraved memorial vault listed members of the royal family who had served in armed conflict, not as a public tribute, but as a quiet acknowledgement of sacrifice within the bloodline itself. Names carved into stone, service recorded without ceremony. Beneath the estate were archival vaults containing 186 oak chests, Each chest held wartime correspondence, private letters, confidential royal communications, documents that never entered the public archive, letters between sovereign and soldier, between monarch and minister, between family members facing the strain of history in real time. There were 72 previously undisclosed royal portraits stored within climate-controlled chambers, including oil paintings of King George VI and Princess Margaret that had never been exhibited, faces captured in moments the public never saw, expressions unguarded, postures relaxed, history preserved without audience. Most astonishing of all were 14 sealed audio recordings of Queen Elizabeth II engaged in private conversations with world leaders: Winston Churchill, Nelson Mandela, Ronald Reagan, Charles de Gaulle. These were not speeches, not public addresses. They were candid dialogues, strategy, reflection, vulnerability, captured and preserved. One archivist who had spent decades inside the royal archives described the estate in a single phrase that lingered long after it was spoken. He said it was not a museum of curated history. It was the raw architecture of royal memory, a place where the monarchy did not perform, it remembered. And perhaps that is why it mattered so profoundly. Because this was not property designed for profit. It was not land meant for development. It was a vault of identity, a physical embodiment of legacy, fragile, powerful, and easily misunderstood by those who saw only its financial value. What Queen Elizabeth safeguarded there was not simply acreage. It was continuity. It was memory without distortion. It was the unspoken understanding that some things must be protected not because they are lucrative, but because they are sacred. And when she chose who would inherit it, she was not choosing a beneficiary. She was choosing a steward. Between 2017 and 2021, Prince William's visits to the Cedar Estate were not routine obligations tucked between public engagements. They were intentional pilgrimages. He did not arrive as a future king rehearsing optics. He arrived as a grandson being tested, quietly, patiently, without announcement. Those weekends were deliberately unpublicized. No staff briefings leaked. No photographers waited beyond the gates. Even within the palace, only a handful of trusted aides were aware of the frequency of his presence there. The estate was not used for state business during those visits. It became instead a classroom without lectures, a proving ground without applause. He walked beside the Queen through the cedar groves in long stretches of silence, silence that was not awkward but deliberate. She would pause near older trees and speak not of ceremony, but of endurance, of what must remain untouched even when everything else evolves. She did not instruct him in how to reign, she showed him how to preserve. Inside the archival vaults, William did work that would never appear in headlines. He handled brittle envelopes sealed decades earlier, letters from soldiers who had written home under the shadow of war. He catalogued naval dispatches that recorded victories and losses in equal measure. He read personal correspondence between monarch and minister, words never meant for public consumption. He saw the monarchy stripped of pageantry and reduced to its rawest form: duty, sacrifice, uncertainty. He spent hours adjusting storage files, reorganizing inventories, cross-checking documentation against handwritten registries. When a humidity imbalance threatened one wing of the archive, he assisted technicians in recalibrating moisture control systems. It was technical, tedious work, the kind of task easily delegated, yet he stayed. There is a specific kind of humility required to preserve something you may one day own. That humility was what Elizabeth was measuring. She watched not how he spoke about legacy, but how he handled it, whether he rushed, whether he grew impatient, whether he saw the estate as asset or archive. In a handwritten annotation placed within the Covenant Trust documentation, Queen Elizabeth wrote, "He will inherit more than the crown. He will inherit the silence that preserved it." The phrase was not metaphorical. The silence she referred to was discipline, the refusal to exploit, the restraint required to protect memory from becoming merchandise. The Cedar Estate's legal structure reflected that same discipline. It did not fall under the Crown Estate's broader governance, nor was it tied to the Duchy of Cornwall's financial apparatus. It was insulated within a private covenant trust, established in 2020 under strict confidentiality. The trust was engineered with precision. It contained a delayed activation clause triggered only after two events occurred. The Queen's state funeral had concluded, and Prince William had been formally recognized as heir to institutional responsibility. The sequencing mattered. The estate would not pass in the turbulence of mourning. It would not transfer during uncertainty. It would activate only when continuity had stabilized. When those conditions were met, the transfer occurred automatically, not ceremonially, not negotiably. Full and exclusive guardianship. The language was almost understated in its clarity. There were no loopholes, no advisory panels, no shared custodianship clauses. The The simplicity of the announcement disguised the complexity of its design. But while the trust structure lay dormant, others were already envisioning alternative futures for the land. Camilla and Tom Parker Bowles had been quietly mapping out their own strategy. Their proposals were carefully framed in language that emphasized cultural preservation and celebration of British culinary heritage. Draft presentations described curated tasting experiences rooted in estate history, artisanal product lines branded with subtle royal association, and private gatherings marketed as intimate encounters with living heritage. On paper, it sounded respectful, sustainable, even progressive. Behind the language, however, lay feasibility projections, investor models, and licensing estimates. Michelin-level restaurant concepts were outlined within the old hunting lodge. Exclusive membership events were discussed for international clientele. Trademark registrations were quietly explored. The estate was being studied not as sanctuary but as platform. Legal advisors examined whether segments of the property could be reclassified under public heritage statutes. The argument was nuanced. If portions were deemed culturally significant beyond private royal interest, shared custodianship could be justified in the name of preservation. The move would not seize control outright, it would dilute exclusivity. But what appeared tactically sound collided with something immovable. The Covenant Trust's exclusivity clause left no interpretive space. Reclassification would not override private guardianship. The architecture had already accounted for this scenario. Northanger Hall revealed the pattern more clearly. Spanning 1,200 acres of protected heritage land, it carried agricultural revenue potential, licensing value, and long-standing diplomatic significance. In the final weeks before her passing, Queen Elizabeth reclassified it as a personal sovereign holding. That technical adjustment shifted it outside automatic institutional succession. In her handwritten directive, she described it as belonging to the child who bears the burden of our future. The phrase reframed inheritance as weight rather than privilege. Northanger was not to be enjoyed, it was to be carried. When exploratory discussions surfaced about incorporating the estate into luxury culinary ventures backed by private investors, they encountered an already sealed will structure that bypassed negotiation. There was no committee to appeal to, no procedural delay to exploit. The safeguards were embedded within sovereign authority itself. Clarence Hill Estate demonstrated an even more explicit boundary. Purchased in 1947 and deliberately shielded from parliamentary entanglement, it had always existed outside public funding complexities. The directive assigning it to William described the estate as free of encumbrance, free of shadow, immune to politics, immune to scandal. The phrase immune to scandal was not rhetorical flourish, it was preventative doctrine. It acknowledged the volatility of modern monarchy, the reputational fragility amplified by media cycles and commercial entanglements. Clarence Hill would remain insulated from both. When a newly registered company sought to position the estate as a regenerative luxury hospitality venture, complete with sustainability branding and curated agrarian experiences, the effort collided with a notarized codicil lodged years earlier. The codicil barred any commercial transformation absent William's direct authorization. The initiative dissolved before it could gather momentum. Greystone Downs was fortified by equally explicit language. Its Tudor chapel, ancient woodland, and preserved architecture were designated as protected assets, not to be materially altered for commercial gain. The clauses read almost like a rebuke in advance, a statement that legacy would not be reshaped to suit contemporary enterprise. Green Heath Estate carried a £37 mill. Iron Private Trust built gradually through strategic transfers over decades. The fund was invisible to anyone not explicitly informed of its existence. It was earmarked for environmental education, child rehabilitation, and stewardship initiatives under William and Catherine's patronage. The trust's purpose was restorative, not lucrative. And then there was Oakage. Protected by a clause titled Anticipatory Obstruction, it nullified challenges from individuals outside the Windsor bloodline or those married into the family after a specified date. The clause did not respond to dispute, it precluded it. It assumed friction and extinguished it before friction could ignite. Across each estate, the pattern is unmistakable. These were not isolated transfers, they were components of a unified strategy. Queen Elizabeth did not merely distribute property, she designed an inheritance immune to erosion. She anticipated legal maneuvering, she anticipated branding attempts, she anticipated investor partnerships cloaked in heritage language, and she addressed each possibility years before it materialized. What emerges from this architecture is not rigidity for its own sake. It is preservation of principle. The estates were not conceived as engines of expansion. They were conceived as repositories of continuity. And in William's quiet weekends among the cedar groves, in his handling of letters never meant for public display, Elizabeth found confirmation that he understood the difference. He did not seek to transform the estates, he sought to protect them. That distinction, more than bloodline, was what secured the transfer. Because at the heart of it all was a question Elizabeth had been answering long before February 2026. Who would guard the memory, not monetize it? Her answer was written not in speeches, but in clauses, not in proclamations, but in silence. What becomes unmistakably clear when these transfers are viewed together, not as isolated decisions, but as a coordinated design, is that Queen Elizabeth did far more than distribute property. She engineered permanence. She constructed a legal fortress so carefully layered that it could withstand pressure from within as effectively as from without. Clause by clause, trust by trust, codicil by codicil. Each document anticipated friction before it appeared, ambition before it organized itself, and commercial imagination before it found language. This was not inheritance in the casual sense of succession, it was strategic insulation. She identified potential vulnerabilities, shared management arguments, heritage reclassification attempts, partnership models disguised as preservation, and quietly eliminated them in advance. She did not wait for conflict. She drafted responses years before objections were voiced. By the time challenges surfaced, the architecture to neutralize them was already sealed, notarized, and beyond reinterpretation. That level of foresight was not accidental, it was protective. Which leads to the deeper question, why did she believe such protection was necessary? The answer lies in a fundamental contrast: stewardship versus commercialization, preservation versus presentation, continuity versus reinvention. To some, these estates represented potential: branding platforms, hospitality ventures, curated exclusivity, strategic partnerships, revenue diversification under the language of heritage enhancement. In an era where institutions often adapt through expansion, those perspectives were not irrational, they were contemporary. But to Elizabeth, these estates were not adaptable assets. They were repositories of memory. They were the physical anchors of continuity, places where the monarchy was not performed but remembered, where duty had been recorded without spectacle, where sacrifice had been archived without marketing, where identity was preserved in its unpolished form. Where others saw potential for curated luxury experiences, she saw the risk of dilution. Where others envisioned premium retreats, she envisioned erosion, not immediate destruction but gradual reshaping, and reshaping to her was as dangerous as removal. In William, she did not see hunger for expansion, she saw tolerance for stillness, a willingness to serve quietly, to catalogue rather than curate, to maintain rather than monetize, to walk without cameras, to listen without broadcasting. That distinction was decisive. His response to attempts at circumvention has mirrored that same discipline. There were no public denunciations, no press briefings condemning opportunism, no theatrical declarations of authority. Instead, he signed charters. He enforced the legal frameworks already in place. He allowed the structure his grandmother had constructed to function exactly as designed. And it functioned without hesitation. As early February light spread across Windsor Great Park in 2026, frost still clinging to hedgerows, the transfer was already complete, not through spectacle. Not through proclamation, but through notarized codicils, sealed trusts, and handwritten certainty. The work had been done years earlier. William walked the grounds now formally entrusted to him, accompanied by his children. There were no grand speeches delivered in that moment, only quiet conversation, questions asked with the innocence of youth, explanations given with measured calm. When his son asked whether the estate would remain theirs forever, the answer was not triumphant, it was conditional, as long as we protect it. That answer reveals everything. These estates are not trophies, they are not rewards for proximity to power, they are not extensions of influence, they are obligations, heavy ones. They represent restraint in an era that rewards visibility, integrity in an era that rewards scale, continuity in a culture that celebrates reinvention. Camilla's and Tom's initiatives were not defeated through confrontation or humiliation. They were rendered structurally impossible long before they matured. Preparation made their defeat inevitable. That inevitability is what gave the entire sequence its quiet finality. This was Elizabeth's final strategic act, not dramatic, not reactive, but comprehensive. She did not argue, she documented. She did not confront, she codified. She did not leave uncertainty, she left architecture. Legacy, as she understood it, was never measured in revenue streams, licensing agreements, or curated exclusivity. It was measured in preservation, in restraint, in the courage to say no when yes would have been profitable, in the discipline to guard what must endure even when those closest to it see opportunity instead of obligation. William inherited the estates, but more importantly, he inherited the burden they represent. He inherited the duty to preserve what cannot be replaced, and he inherited something even more enduring than land or trust or title, documented certainty that the sovereign who knew him most intimately believed he would protect what she could no longer personally guard. That certainty may prove to be the most valuable inheritance of all.